Warm glow of the desk lamp stretched across my coin room as I stood before the open wardrobe hidden behind a sliding bookshelf. Inside hung clothing gathered from dozens of eras: military tunics, Victorian coats, fedoras, waistcoats, wool overcoats, all carefully chosen over years of preparation. Tonight required precision. 1937 Ottawa. I removed a charcoal wool business suit from its hanger and laid it carefully across the chair beside my desk. The cut was conservative and period correct: broad shoulders, high-waisted trousers, double-breasted waistcoat. Beside it, I placed a crisp white-collar shirt, dark tie, polished black shoes, and a heavy camel hair overcoat suitable for an Ottawa winter. If I was going to walk into a bank and the Royal Canadian Mint itself, I could not look like a collector. I had to look like a respectable businessman of means. On my desk sat the computer system connected to my uncle's strange brass time device. When I first inherited it, the mechanism looked like nothing more than an oversized antique pocket watch attached to a jumble of impossible components and rotating engraved dials. I had no idea how it worked. Then one evening a very skilled friend came over to have a look at it. What followed changed everything. Within hours he had begun figuring out how the device functioned. Somehow, against all logic, he managed to interface the mechanism with my computer system, incorporating the brass controls directly into the machine. By the end of the night, my ordinary computer desk had become something extraordinary, part modern technology, part impossible time machine. Mounted beside the monitor was the polished brass control assembly itself, complete with rotating dials and engraved calibration rings. On the monitor glowed the enlarged image of a Canadian 1936 dot cent. Tiny, brown, legendary. I reached forward and slowly turned the large brass dial attached beside the computer screen. The engraved markings rotated with a heavy metallic clicking sound. Denomination: 1 cent. Another turn. Year: 1936. Then the final dial. Mint: Ottawa. The machine immediately responded with a deep electrical hum that vibrated through the floor beneath my feet. I opened my leather briefcase one final time to inspect the contents. Inside velvet-lined compartments rested carefully selected trade goods. Small poured gold bars with believable refinery markings. A gold cigarette case, gold pocket watch chains and cufflinks. Ornate gold pen sets. Several finely crafted silver ornaments and medallions. A polished silver statuette of Queen Victoria. Beneath them rested the folded letter of introduction: Mr. John Henry Leo Conlon of Toronto, Ontario. Everything looked authentic. Everything had to. I dressed carefully, fastening the gold cufflinks before slipping on the heavy wool overcoat. When I finally placed the fedora on my head and picked up the briefcase, I no longer looked like a retired numismatist from the future. I looked like a prosperous traveling businessman from 1937. Exactly the point. The humming from the computer deepened. The lights in the coin room flickered. Then the air itself began to bend. A glowing oval-shaped portal slowly materialized beside the shelves of coins and military medals. Brilliant blue light swirled within its edges like liquid electricity, casting ghostly reflections across the room. The portal stood nearly 7 feet tall, humming softly as waves of blue energy rippled through its center. Beyond it, I could see falling snow illuminated by old-fashioned street lamps. Ottawa. I tightened my grip on the briefcase and took one last look around my coin room. Then I stepped through the blue oval. The cold hit instantly. Not modern cold. Older cold. Coal smoke drifted heavily through the winter air. Somewhere nearby, steel streetcar wheels screeched against icy rails while automobile engines coughed and sputtered through the snowy streets. I stood in a narrow alley near Sussex Street as the glowing blue oval behind me silently collapsed inward and vanished. Then I saw it. Across the street stood the stone walls of the Royal Canadian Mint. For a moment I simply stared. Every genuine 1936 dot cent in existence had passed through that building. I adjusted my overcoat and began walking toward downtown Ottawa. Nobody paid me any attention. That was the beauty of proper preparation. A well-dressed businessman carrying a leather briefcase belonged in 1937 Ottawa. A few blocks later, I stepped into the grand marble lobby of the Bank of Montreal. Brass teller wickets lined the walls beneath hanging chandeliers while businessmen quietly conducted transactions through clouds of cigar smoke and winter air drifting through the entrance. A teller looked up. "Yes, sir?" I removed one glove calmly. "Leo Conlon of Toronto," I said politely. "I have a letter of introduction regarding commercial arrangements while I am in Ottawa." The teller took the letter and disappeared into the back office. Minutes later, I found myself seated before the branch manager, a stern gentleman with silver spectacles and perfectly combed hair. "You are engaged in the metals trade, Mr. Conlon?" "Among other interests," I replied carefully. I opened the briefcase slightly. The office light reflected brilliantly off the gold items within. Not enough to appear reckless, just enough to establish legitimacy. The manager's expression softened immediately. "I see. I have business involving refinement and valuation," I explained, "as well as temporary banking accommodations while I remain in the city." He folded the letter carefully. "I believe we can assist you." "Perfect." Over the next several days, I gradually liquidated many of the gold and silver items I had brought with me. Some were refined, others were sold or exchanged through proper banking and commercial channels. The process was slow enough to avoid attracting attention, yet profitable enough to provide me with a substantial amount of perfectly legitimate 1937 Canadian paper currency. That currency became my operating capital. Each day I visited banks throughout Ottawa, obtaining fresh rolls of cents directly from circulation while maintaining the appearance of a businessman, conducting ordinary commercial transactions. For the next week, I settled into a modest temporary lodging house, not far from downtown Ottawa. Every morning I walked through the snowy streets dressed in my business attire, carrying my leather briefcase as I moved between the bank, the Mint District, and several nearby businesses. Each day I obtained more fresh rolls of cents, and each night, back in my rented room beneath the dim yellow glow of a bedside lamp, I carefully opened the paper wrappers and searched through the coins one by one. Most were ordinary 1,937 cents. But every so often, there it was, with the tiny dot beneath the date. By the end of the week, I had managed to acquire several of the elusive coins I had come for. Not enough to attract suspicion. Just enough. And the best part was this. Not all of the money I had converted from the gold and silver had been spent. Much of the remaining period cash stayed carefully hidden inside my briefcase. Those 1937 banknotes and coins would come back with me to the future, where they would become part of my growing historical collection, or perhaps serve as operating funds for future journeys into the past. But before leaving Ottawa, I made one final arrangement. Returning to the bank late one afternoon, I requested the rental of a safe deposit box. The branch manager himself handled the paperwork. Inside the box, I placed a carefully sealed package containing several items from my journey: period Canadian banknotes, silver certificates, written instructions, and several genuine Canadian 1936 dot coins. Not just cents. I included a small variety of the rare dot coinage I had quietly managed to acquire during my stay: a 1936 dot cent, a 1936 dot dime, a 1,936 dot quarter. Each was carefully wrapped and labeled in period paper envelopes before being placed inside the box. The manager raised an eyebrow as I explained the unusual conditions attached to the deposit. "I wish the box to remain sealed for a period of 90 years, I told him calmly. "Should it remain unclaimed at that time, the contents are to be divided by my surviving descendants and to the current member of Parliament responsible for the Canadian military." The manager looked at me curiously but said nothing. "The contents are then to be liquidated," I continued, "with the proceeds shared among various Canadian regimental associations for the purpose of grants and bursaries and my descendants." For a brief moment, the old banker simply studied me in silence. Then slowly he nodded. "A most unusual arrangement, Mr. Conlon." "Perhaps," I replied quietly, "but an important one." He locked the documents and deposit box away without another question. As I left the bank that evening, I could not help but smile slightly to myself. 90 years. Long after everyone in 1937 Ottawa had forgotten my face, the contents of that little box would still be waiting. And if it was ever opened in the future, those tiny dot coins alone would be worth a fortune capable of helping generations of Canadian veterans and their families. On the final evening, snow drifted quietly through the Ottawa streets as I packed my belongings into the briefcase. The dot cents were carefully wrapped and secured deep inside among the remaining valuables and unused currency. I left the temporary lodging shortly after dark. The city was quiet. Streetcars had become infrequent, and only the occasional automobile passed through the falling snow. I walked several blocks until I reached an empty side street between two brick warehouses, where the shadows hid me from view. Then I reached into my coat pocket. From inside, I withdrew the original brass device itself. Unlike the larger system connected to my computer back home, this version looked almost exactly like an oversized pocket watch. Its polished brass surface gleamed faintly beneath the street lamp as snowflakes melted against the engraved dials marked denomination, year, mint. But this time the dials were already set, 1937 Ottawa. Home coordinates locked in. The return mechanism was the rounded knob at the very top of the device, much like the winding crown of an antique pocket watch. My friend had discovered early on that once the machine's destination had been established through the computer system in my coin room, the portable device no longer required adjustment in the field. All I had to do to return home was press the top. Simple, elegant, terrifying. I held the brass device tightly in my gloved hand as snow swirled quietly around me. For one last moment, I looked out across 1937 Ottawa, the dim yellow streetlights, the drifting coal smoke, the distant sound of a streetcar echoing through the winter night. Somewhere behind me, inside a vault at the Bank of Montreal, a safe deposit box now rested in silence containing period Canadian currency, written instructions for the future, several genuine Canadian 1936 dot coins, including the rare cent, dime, and quarter. If unclaimed after 90 years, the contents would eventually help support Canadian regimental associations through grants and bursaries. A quiet gift hidden in time itself. I smiled faintly. Then I pressed the knob on top of the brass device. Instantly, the air before me distorted. A brilliant blue oval-shaped portal burst silently into existence between the brick buildings, swirling with electric light. Snowflakes caught within its glow spun like tiny stars as warm amber light spilled outward from the other side. My coin room. Home. Without hesitation, I stepped forward through the glowing blue oval. A moment later, I was standing once again inside my coin room as the portal collapsed behind me with a soft electrical whisper. Silence returned. Only the faint hum of my computer remained. For several seconds, I simply stood there breathing in the familiar warmth of home while snow melted slowly from my overcoat onto the hardwood floor. Then, almost reverently, I placed the briefcase upon the desk and opened it. Inside rested several genuine Canadian 1936 dot cents. Not replicas, not auction pieces, the very coins I had personally removed from circulation nearly 90 years earlier.